The cowboy found her chained in a ravine. When he freed her, she clung to him in silence. Welcome back to our channel, fellow story lovers. Before we dive into today's gripping tale from the Old West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss our incredible stories. And please, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're listening from. Are you joining us from Texas, maybe California, or perhaps somewhere across the ocean? We love hearing from our global family. Today's story will take you to the harsh, unforgiving landscape of 1880s Wyoming territory, where honor and survival walk hand in hand, and where one man's act of courage changes two lives forever. This is a tale of redemption, healing, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of the frontier. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's journey back to a time when the West was still wild. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel. Sam Harrison's weathered face as his horse, Thunder, picked its way carefully down the rocky slope. At 32, Sam had the lean, hardened look of a man who'd spent most of his adult life under the open sky, driving cattle across endless plains and sleeping under a canopy of stars. He'd been tracking strays for 3 days now, following hoofprints and broken branches through increasingly treacherous terrain. The Double R Ranch, where he'd worked for the past 5 years, couldn't afford to lose even a handful of cattle with winter approaching. Every head counted when it came to surviving the brutal Wyoming cold. Thunder suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Sam's hand instinctively moved to the Colt 45 on his hip as he scanned the ravine below. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the wind whistling through the rocks. A whimper. Human. Female. Sam's blood ran cold. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, finding another person usually meant trouble. He dismounted carefully, leaving Thunder ground-tied, and made his way down into the shadowy depths of the ravine. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his days. Chained to a massive boulder like some wild animal was a young woman, maybe 25, her once fine dress now torn and filthy. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face that had once been beautiful, but now bore the hollow, terrified look of someone who'd stared death in the face and expected it to win. "Jesus Christ," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman's head snapped up at the sound, and Sam saw her entire body tense, ready to flee despite the heavy iron shackles around her wrists and ankles. Her eyes, deep brown and filled with a pain that went soul-deep, met his for just a moment before she looked away, as if eye contact itself was too dangerous. "Easy there, miss," Sam said softly, the same tone he'd use with a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Sam Harrison. I'm going to get you out of here." He approached slowly, hands visible, noting the way she pressed herself against the rock as if trying to disappear into it. The chains were heavy, meant for securing livestock, not people. The sight of them made rage build in Sam's chest like a prairie fire. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he didn't expect an answer. The woman hadn't made a sound since that initial whimper. Sam examined the locks, old but solid. He'd need tools he didn't have with him. "I'm going to have to shoot the chains off," he explained gently. "The noise might startle you, but it's the only way." The woman's eyes went wide with terror at the mention of gunfire, and she shook her head frantically. "Hey, hey!" Sam soothed, crouching down to her level but keeping his distance. "I won't hurt you. I promise on my mother's grave. But these chains, we need to get them off." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Sam saw something in her eyes then, a flicker of desperate hope fighting against years of learned fear. Finally, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Sam drew his Colt, aimed carefully at the chain link farthest from her body, and fired. The shot echoed through the ravine like thunder, and the woman pressed herself even tighter against the rock, but the chains separated cleanly. One by one, Sam shot through each restraint, his anger growing with every broken link. When the last chain fell away, the woman didn't move. She sat there, free but frozen, as if she'd forgotten what freedom meant. "It's all right," Sam said, holstering his gun. "You're safe now." That's when she moved. In one fluid motion, she launched herself forward and wrapped her arms around Sam's waist. clinging to him with the desperate strength of someone drowning who'd just been thrown a rope. She didn't speak, hadn't spoken a single word, but her silence somehow communicated more than any plea could have. Sam felt her trembling against him, felt the weight of whatever horrors she'd endured in the way she held on to him like he was her only anchor to the world. "Say it's all right," he repeated, awkwardly patting her back. "You're safe now, I've got you." But even as he said the words, Sam knew their troubles were just beginning. Someone had chained this woman in the middle of nowhere, and whoever it was might come looking for her. He had to get her somewhere safe, somewhere she could heal. The question was, where? Chapter 2. The Journey to Safety. Sam knew he couldn't stay in the ravine. Whoever had chained the woman here might return, and he was in no position to fight off multiple attackers while protecting someone who could barely stand. The woman, he still didn't know her name, hadn't let go of him since he'd freed her, and he could feel her whole body shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. "Miss Guy," he said gently, "we need to move. Can you walk?" She pulled back just enough to look at him, and Sam saw raw terror flash across her features at the suggestion of separation. She shook her head violently and gripped his shirt even tighter. All right," Sam soothed. "I won't leave you, but we can't stay here. It's not safe." He helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed unsteadily. When was the last time she'd eaten? Had water? The thought made his jaw clench with renewed anger. Getting her up to where Thunder waited proved challenging. The woman couldn't seem to let go of Sam, even to climb, so he ended up half carrying her up the rocky slope. Thunder, bless his steady heart, didn't so much as twitch when the stranger approached. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured to his horse. "We've got a passenger." The real challenge came when Sam tried to mount. The woman panicked when he attempted to lift her onto Thunder first, clinging to him with such desperation that Sam feared she might pull them both down. Finally, he mounted first, then carefully pulled her up behind him. The moment she was settled, her arms wrapped around his waist like iron bands. Sam had never been so aware of another person's breathing, the way her chest rose and fell against his back in quick, shallow pants that spoke of barely controlled panic. "Si, where are we going?" he asked, half to himself, half hoping she might answer. She didn't, of course, but Sam had already made his decision. The Double R Ranch was too far, and too many questions would be asked. But 15 miles northeast, nestled in a protected valley, lived Martha Henley, a widow woman who'd taken in strays of both the human and animal variety for as long as Sam had known her. If anyone could help this broken woman heal, it was Martha. The ride took 4 hours, with Sam stopping frequently to check on his passenger and offer her water from his canteen. She drank gratefully but still wouldn't speak, communicating only through nods and headshakes. Her grip on him never loosened, and Sam found himself oddly comforted by her presence, even as his heart ached for whatever had been done to her. As they rode, Sam found himself talking to fill the silence. He told her about Thunder, about the ranch, about the cattle they'd been tracking. He spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his parents' farm, why he'd come west. He wasn't sure if she was listening, but her breathing gradually slowed to match the rhythm of his voice. The sun was setting when they finally saw the warm glow of Martha's cabin windows in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Sam could smell bread baking even from a quarter-mile away. The woman behind him tensed as they approached the cabin, her grip becoming almost painful. "That's Martha Henley's place," Sam explained softly. "She's good people, kindest woman in Wyoming territory. She'll help you." Martha appeared in the doorway before they'd even stopped, alerted by Thunder's hoofbeats. At 65, she was a small, sturdy woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Sam's passenger, and her expression shifted from curiosity to deep concern. "Samuel Harrison," she called out. "What have you brought me?" "Someone who needs help, Mrs. Henley," Sam replied, dismounting carefully. The woman slid down after him but immediately pressed against his side, using him as a shield between herself and Martha. Martha's keen eyes took in the torn dress, the matted hair, the way the young woman cowered behind Sam like a frightened animal. Her face hardened with an anger Sam had rarely seen from the gentle widow. "Bring her inside," Martha said simply. "I'll put the kettle on." But when Sam tried to lead the woman toward the cabin, She planted her feet and refused to move. She looked up at him with such pleading in her eyes that Sam felt his heart crack a little more. "You want me to stay?" he asked softly, a tiny nod. "Mrs. Henley," Sam called out, "would it be all right if I stayed the night? I think she's afraid." Martha studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "Course, child. Bring her in." Slowly, it took another 20 minutes to coax the woman inside, and even then she wouldn't sit down until Sam did first, positioning herself so she could see both him and the door at all times. Martha moved around her kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing a simple meal of bread, soup and tea, all while maintaining a gentle stream of conversation that asked nothing and demanded no responses. "I'm Martha," the older woman said, as she set a bowl of soup in front of their guest. "You're safe here, dear. No one will hurt you in my house." The woman looked at the food as if she'd forgotten what it was for, then glanced at Sam uncertainly. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Mrs. Henley's the best cook in 3 counties. She ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might be taken away. Sam noticed her hands shaking as she lifted the spoon, noticed the careful way she tested each bite as if checking for poison. Whatever had been done to her, it had been thorough and cruel. When she'd finished eating, Martha showed them to the small guest room, providing the woman with a clean nightgown and Sam with blankets for the floor. But when Martha tried to help the woman change clothes, she backed away in terror, shaking her head frantically. "It's all right, dear," Martha soothed. "I'll just leave these here for you." That night, Sam lay on the hard floor listening to the woman's restless breathing from the narrow bed. Twice she cried out in her sleep, and both times Sam had to resist the urge to wake her. Whatever demons haunted her dreams, she had to face them herself. But in the morning, he woke to find her curled up on the floor beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm as if she needed the contact to feel safe enough to sleep. And Sam realized that whether he'd planned it or not, his life had just become irrevocably intertwined with this silent, broken woman who trusted him with her very existence. Chapter 3. Breaking the Silence. 3 weeks passed at Martha's cabin, and the woman still hadn't spoken a single word. But she had begun to heal in small, almost imperceptible ways. Sam had stayed, telling his foreman at the R that he was helping a widow with some repairs. It wasn't entirely a lie. He'd fixed Martha's fence, mended her roof and chopped enough firewood to last through winter. But the real reason he stayed was sitting by the window, carefully mending one of Martha's old dresses with steady, practiced hands. She'd finally accepted clean clothes and a proper bath, though only after Martha had assured her that Sam would remain outside and that the door would stay unlocked. She'd kept the dress Martha had given her, but instead of discarding her torn original garment, she'd asked for needle and thread to repair it. Sam watched her work from across the room, noting the precision of her stitches, the way she held the fabric with reverence rather than distaste. This dress meant something to her. Perhaps it was the last connection to whoever she'd been before. "You're handy with a needle," Martha observed, settling into her rocking chair with her own mending. "That's fine work." The woman looked up briefly, offering the slightest hint of a smile before returning to her task. It was the first time Sam had seen anything resembling happiness cross her features. "My sister could sew like that," Sam said quietly. "Made the most beautiful quilts you ever saw. Said there was peace in the rhythm of it." This time, the woman's hand stilled completely. She looked at Sam with an intensity that made him feel as if she were seeing straight through to his soul. Then, so softly, he almost missed it, she spoke. "Sarah." Sam's breath caught. Martha's rocking chair stopped mid-creak. "Sarah?" Sam repeated gently. "Is that your name?" A tiny nod. Then she looked down at her hands, as if surprised by her own voice. "Sarah," Martha said warmly. "That's a beautiful name, dear. It was a breakthrough, but a fragile one." Sarah didn't speak again for 2 days, and when she did, it was only single words in response to direct questions. "Yes. No. Please. Thank you." Each word seemed to cost her tremendous effort, as if speaking itself was dangerous. But gradually, she began to trust. She started helping Martha with cooking, moving around the kitchen with a competence that spoke of years of experience. She knew how to preserve vegetables, how to tell when bread was perfectly baked, how to make soap from scratch. Whoever she'd been before, she'd run a household. Sam found himself looking forward to these domestic scenes more than he cared to admit. There was something deeply peaceful about watching Sarah work, about the way she moved with quiet efficiency, about the small smile that sometimes appeared when she thought no one was looking. One evening, as Sam sat on the porch whittling and Sarah worked on her eternal mending, she suddenly spoke without prompting. "My husband's dress." Sam's hands stilled on the piece of wood he'd been shaping. "Your husband's dress?" Sarah's fingers traced the repaired fabric with infinite gentleness. He bought it for me, for our wedding day." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet evening air, every word was clear. "Said I was the most beautiful woman in all of Colorado Territory." Colorado, the first real clue about where she'd come from. "He sounds like a good man," Sam said carefully. Sarah's face crumpled then, and Sam saw tears begin to track down her cheeks. "They killed him," she whispered. "The Dalton gang. They came to our ranch, wanted our horses. When John tried to stop them, she couldn't finish, but she didn't need to." Sam felt rage build in his chest like a physical thing. The Dalton gang was known throughout the territory, a group of ruthless men who took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. They'd been reported as far north as Montana and as far south as New Mexico, always moving, always one step ahead of the law. "How long were you—" Sam couldn't bring himself to finish the question. 3 months, Sarah said, her voice hollow. "They kept me chained like an animal, said I was their insurance in case the law caught up to them, fed me just enough to keep me alive." She looked up at Sam with eyes that held depths of pain he couldn't fathom. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Sam said, though they both knew that wasn't true. "No," Sarah said firmly, the strongest her voice had been since that first whispered, "Sarah, not anyone. You could have ridden past, could have decided it wasn't your problem, but you didn't." She paused, seeming to gather courage. Why? Sam considered the question seriously. Why had he stopped? Why had he risked his own safety for a stranger? "My pa always said that how a man treats someone who can't help themselves shows his true character," Sam finally said. "Guess I couldn't live with myself if I'd ridden away." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then did something that nearly stopped Sam's heart. She reached out and placed her hand over his, her fingers warm and surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said simply. They sat like that as the sun set, her hand in his, both of them looking out over Martha's peaceful valley. For the first time since he'd found her, Sarah seemed truly at peace. But peace, Sam knew, was a fragile thing on the frontier. And somewhere out there, the Dalton gang was still riding free, still taking what they wanted from decent folks. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "They'll come looking for me," she said quietly. "They don't like losing their possessions." Sam turned to look at her, seeing not the broken woman he'd found in that ravine, but someone who was finding her strength again, bit by bit. "Let them come," he said, his voice hard as granite. "They'll find me waiting." For the first time since he'd known her, Sarah smiled, really smiled. And Sam realized that somewhere in the last 3 weeks, protecting this woman had become more than just the right thing to do. It had become everything. Chapter 4. The storm approaching. 2 days after Sarah's revelation, Sam knew their peaceful sanctuary was about to end. He'd ridden into the nearby town of Cedar Falls for supplies and heard the talk in the general store. 3 strangers had been asking questions about a missing woman, offering a reward for information. The Dalton gang had found their trail. Sam rode back to Martha's cabin with his heart heavy as lead. He found Sarah in the garden, helping Martha harvest the last of the autumn vegetables. She looked up as he approached, and her face immediately went pale at his expression. "They're here," she said. It wasn't a question. Sam nodded grimly. 3 of them, asking questions in town, offering money for word of you. Sarah's hands began to shake, and she dropped the carrots she'd been holding. For a moment, Sam thought she might collapse back into the broken woman he'd found in that ravine. But then her spine straightened, and he saw something fierce spark in her dark eyes. "I won't run anymore," she said quietly. "I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." "Sarah, these men are killers," Sam said urgently. "I'm good with a gun, but I can't face 3 of them and keep you safe at the same time." "Then don't." The voice came from Martha, who'd been listening from the porch. The older woman walked toward them with determined steps. carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. "Don't try to do this alone." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a well-maintained Winchester rifle and a gun belt with a Colt 38. "My late husband's," she explained. "I know how to use them, and so does Sarah." Sam stared at Sarah in surprise. She nodded slowly. "John taught me. Said every ranch wife needed to know how to protect herself and her home." Her voice grew stronger. "I may have forgotten for a while, but I remember now." That evening they made their plans. The Dalton gang would likely approach at dawn. It was their preferred time for raids, when their targets were still groggy and unprepared. Martha's cabin sat in a natural bowl of land, with hills on three sides and the only easy approach from the east. Sam positioned himself in the barn with a clear view of the eastern approach. Martha took the back of the house with her Winchester, watching the more difficult western route in case they tried to circle around. And Sarah, despite Sam's protests, insisted on staying in the cabin with a loaded rifle and instructions to shoot anyone who wasn't Sam or Martha. "I won't be helpless again," she'd said with quiet determination. "Not ever again." As the first grey light of dawn touched the eastern hills, Sam saw them coming. 3 riders, approaching with the casual confidence of men who'd never met serious resistance. He recognized Jake Dalton from the wanted posters, a tall, lean man with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty that extended far beyond simple robbery. Sam waited until they were 50 yards from the cabin before he called out, "That's far enough, Dalton." The 3 men pulled up, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. Jake Dalton's face split into a cold grin when he spotted Sam in the barn doorway. Well, Dalton called back. "The cowboy who's been harboring our property. You've caused us considerable inconvenience, and friend." "Your property is a free woman with a name," Sam replied, his rifle trained on Dalton's chest. "And you're trespassing on private land." "Now, that's where you're wrong," said one of Dalton's companions, a stocky man with a vicious scar running down his left cheek. "That woman belongs to us. We have an investment in her, you might say." Rage flooded through Sam at the casual way they spoke of Sarah, but he kept his voice level. "The only investment you have is in the rope that's waiting for you in every town between here and Mexico." Dalton's grin widened. Big words from one man facing 3. "Tell you what, cowboy, you hand over our woman and we'll make your death quick. Otherwise—" He shrugged eloquently. "Counter-offer," came Martha's voice from the back of the house, where she'd moved to get a better angle. "You ride out of here now, and I won't put a bullet in your spine." The third gang member, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, nervously scanned the hills. "Jake, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Billy," Dalton snapped. Then, louder, "You're outnumbered. Old woman, best let the men handle this." That was Martha's answer. Her Winchester cracked, and Billy's hat flew clean off his head. The young outlaw yelped and nearly fell from his horse. "Next one won't miss," Martha called pleasantly. But Dalton was already moving, spurring his horse toward the barn while drawing his pistol. His scarred companion rode hard for the cabin, and Billy, recovering from his shock, followed. Sam's first shot took Dalton in the shoulder, spinning him around in his saddle but not dropping him. The outlaw leader returned fire, his bullet splintering the barn door inches from Sam's head. From the cabin came the crack of rifle fire, Sarah's Winchester speaking with deadly accuracy. The scarred man's horse screamed and went down, pinning its rider beneath it. The man's curses turned to screams of pain as his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Martha's rifle boomed again, and Billy tumbled from his saddle, clutching his arm and howling. But Dalton was still coming, his wounded shoulder not slowing him down. He'd reached the barn now, and Sam heard him hit the ground running. A moment later, the outlaw leader appeared around the corner of the barn, his Colt leveled at Sam's chest. "Should have minded your own business, cowboy," Dalton snarled. The shot echoed across the valley, but it wasn't Dalton who fired. Sarah stood in the cabin doorway, her rifle smoking in her hands. Dalton looked down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back at the woman he'd held captive for 3 months. "My name," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the morning air, "is Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, and I am nobody's property." Jake Dalton fell face first into the dirt and didn't move again. In the sudden silence that followed, Sam could hear birds singing in the nearby trees, as if the world was celebrating the end of a nightmare. The surviving gang members, Billy with his wounded arm and the scarred man with his broken leg, were taken to town under guard, where they faced charges for murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other crimes. They would hang before winter's end. But for Sam and Sarah, standing together in Martha's peaceful valley as the sun rose fully over the eastern hills, the future stretched out before them like an open road, full of possibilities they were only beginning to imagine. Chapter 5. New Beginnings. 6 months later, the sound of hammering echoed across the meadow where Sam was building a small house. Spring had come early to Wyoming territory, and with it, a sense of renewal that seemed to touch everything, the land, the animals, and most especially Sarah. She was in the garden now, her hands deep in rich earth as she planted vegetables for their first real harvest together. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long had finally faded, replaced by something Sam had never dared hope to see again. Genuine happiness. "Sam!" Sarah called out, brushing dirt from her hands as she stood. "Come see this!" He set down his hammer and walked over to where she was kneeling beside a small patch of turned soil. There, pushing through the dark earth in neat green rows, were the first shoots of the carrots they'd planted together just 2 weeks ago. "Look at them grow," Sarah said softly, wonder in her voice as if she'd never seen anything quite so miraculous as new life emerging from the ground. Sam knelt beside her, admiring her work. In the months since the confrontation with the Dalton gang, he'd watched Sarah bloom like these tender shoots, slowly at first, then with increasing strength and confidence. She'd started speaking regularly within a week of Dalton's death, as if his demise had freed her voice along with everything else. "You've got the gift," Sam said, gesturing to the orderly rows of vegetables. "But this garden's going to feed us well come harvest time." "Us," Sarah repeated, testing the word as if it still surprised her. She looked up at Sam with eyes that were clear and bright. "I never thought I'd feel safe saying us again." Sam reached out and took her dirt-stained hand in his work-roughened one. "You're safe now, Sarah." "We both are." It hadn't been easy, those first few months after the shooting. Sarah had struggled with nightmares, and Sam had wrestled with his own demons. The weight of taking a life, even in defense of someone he cared about. But Martha, in her infinite wisdom, had guided them both through the darkest times. "Healing isn't a straight path," the older woman had told them one evening as they'd sat around her kitchen table. "It winds and turns, sometimes takes you backward before you can go forward again, but as long as you keep walking, you'll get where you need to be." And they had kept walking together. Sam had left the Double R Ranch in the spring, using his saved wages to buy the small plot of land where they now lived. It wasn't much, just 80 acres of good grazing land with a stream running through it, but it was theirs. A fresh start, built on honest work and genuine affection. "Sam," Sarah said now, her voice carrying a note he'd learned to recognize. She had something important to say. "What is it?" Sarah stood, brushing the dirt from her dress, not the wedding dress she'd mended with such care, but a new one Martha had helped her sew from cheerful blue calico. The wedding dress hung carefully in their bedroom, preserved but no longer worn. Some memories, they'd learned, were better honored than relived. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "About names." Sam's heart skipped. They'd been married by the circuit preacher just last month, a simple ceremony with Martha as witness and half the town of Cedar Falls in attendance. But they hadn't yet talked about children, though Sam had hoped. "Names," he managed. "For the baby," Sarah said simply, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. Sam felt the world tilt on its axis. "Baby," Sarah nodded, tears of joy sparkling in her eyes. "Martha helped me figure it out yesterday. She's had suspicions for weeks." Sarah stepped closer, taking Sam's hands in both of hers. "We're going to have a baby, Sam." For a moment, Sam couldn't speak. He thought of the broken woman he'd found chained in that ravine, and then looked at the radiant, strong woman standing before him now. The transformation seemed nothing short of miraculous. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, sudden uncertainty flickering across her features. Instead of answering with words, Sam swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing as her skirts billowed out around them. When he set her down, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said. Scared, excited, grateful, amazed, but mostly just full, like my heart's so full it might burst. Sarah smiled, the brilliant, unguarded smile that still had the power to stop Sam's breath. John would have been happy for us, she said softly. He always said life was meant to be lived forward, not backward. It was the first time she'd mentioned her first husband without pain, and Sam understood what a gift that was, not just to John's memory, but to their future together. What names were you thinking? Sam asked. Martha, if it's a girl, Sarah said immediately. After the woman who gave us both a home when we needed one most. Perfect, Sam agreed. And if it's a boy? Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out over their small but growing homestead. Samuel, she said finally, after the man who freed me from those chains and taught me that some cowboys really are heroes. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their half-built house watching the sun set over the Wyoming hills, Sam reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, he'd been a simple ranch hand with no real ties to anyone or anything. Now he had a wife, a home, and a baby coming. Child, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day? Sarah asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Every day, Sam admitted, but then I stop wondering and start being grateful instead. For what? Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking. For strays, he said finally. Sarah lifted her head to look at him curiously. My horse was following strays when I found you, Sam explained. If those cattle hadn't wandered off, if I hadn't been doing my job, we never would have met. Sarah smiled and settled back against his shoulder. Then here's to strays, she said softly, and to cowboys who follow them into ravines, and to women strong enough to break their own chains, Sam added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sam Harrison, former drifter, former ranch hand, now husband and soon-to-be father, counted himself the luckiest man in all of Wyoming territory. After all, he'd found something worth more than all the gold in California. A love forged in hardship, tempered by trust and built to last a lifetime. Some things, he'd learned, were worth getting chained up for. The end. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Old West. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and let us know in the comments what you thought of Sam and Sarah's tale. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures. Where are you watching from today? We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Until next time, keep those stories alive in your hearts.